so perhaps grid connection will not be the key element here. But let's see, Marcel, same question, in terms of the risks that you foresee in Portugal. I know you live in Portugal since many years, you know the country, you have experience here. From your point of view, what do you see as the major risk you would like to highlight right now?
Yeah. So let me thank Portugal for having me as an inhabitant, right? I live here with great pleasure. And I think we hear a lot of concerns and challenges, and I think we will all solve them, right? Because they're solvable. And so Madoqua has 3 projects on their landscape currently. One of them is in Sinus, for which we like 0.5 gigawatt connection point, right? we're having a project a little bit further down the line for another location, for which we like another 0.5 gigawatt. So we're kind of helping you already to grow the network by 10%, and that's just the beginning, right? That's just the beginning, because we need so much more power. The power that we need is not just to replace what you get out of your socket at home. The power that we need is what you need to get to drive around, to take away all the fossil fuels over the next couple of decades. So that's where the power increases. Even the 10 gigawatts will not be enough for Portugal. Now, so I see that there's a lot of these things, and it made me go back to my thought a little bit more than a year ago when I started looking at this, and I'm like, it's so easy to do the calculations on these projects and decide that they're not worthwhile, right? It's so easy to spend the day and then say, gee, it doesn't work, stop. Well, that's not what I'm doing, right? That's not what Madoqua is doing. We're convinced that we should drive this forward and find solutions. And since we're not building the projects yet, the insurance market will be ready when we are ready to construct, right? That I'm sure. One of these things, I think the government will accelerate and will help us. I think the port of Setúbal will facilitate the development of a huge construction facility for floating structures. That's what I believe. Because if we don't do that, as Portugal, we're missing the international market. That's what the reality is. So this is a little bit of my passion around this topic. And I come from the oil and gas industry. Right? And I did some oil and gas projects in Portugal. I'm so happy that I do energy transition nowadays. So now how do I get back to the point of your question?
Well, the point of my question was the risks, and you turn over your answer and said you put the perspective of the risk importance here on another level. And
yeah, I believe that is important, right? Because I'm for all the previous sessions as well. I hear a lot of arguments. If you list them all out, you're done, right? I'm actually amazed that you're still sitting here, right? Because these messages were not so positive. But we know we need the power, right? Somewhere we know. So that's, I think, my message. So we need to keep pushing forward and develop these projects. And Portugal, in particular, has a great opportunity to be a supplier of parts of these projects. And not just the 10 gigawatts in Portugal. That's nice. Maybe we do 25% of that in Portugal. Let's do all the 25% of the north of Europe as well, because that's where the money is, right? Exporting the capabilities that we have in Portugal. So that's
Thank you, Marcel.
my little sales pitch on Portugal. So,
thank you
for having me.
I will, Diederick, sorry, I will jump to Marcus in order to keep the same question from the developer, and then I will leave where money is for the end. Marcus, same question to you. ACCIONA, I believe, has perhaps not the exactly power-to-X approach, but more on the standard approach, I would call it, under the mechanisms for CFDs or any other warranties. How do you see the risks in Portugal, our ambitions? Is too much ambition that can suddenly bring it into a known reality, or it's still achievable? How do you see all this?
I mean, I think there is an ambitious target. That's a reality. It depends on which will be the speed that the government will put on that. I mean, what is 10 gigawatts? I mean, its theory in 2030 is that you will have already launched, okay, the seabed action, okay, there will be different companies working on that, okay, and that there will be already the CDFs for the first 2.5 gigawatts. I think that that's achievable. But we have to speed up the process. I think that what is important, I think that it has been commented already in the previous speech, okay, is that the government needs to put on the table a clear rules of the game. And I think that the offshore is not only developer, I mean, is a country development. So you have to think about the interconnection, about the ports, about the infrastructure, about the workload. So you have to do all these kind of things, okay, and that everybody will be aligned trying to achieve that goal. So the reality is that from the development point of view, a part of the clear rules of the game that we'll be able to assess that and define our strategy, I think that we have to ensure, the government has to ensure a predictable and large enough pipeline of projects that we will be able to take that risk and go ahead. Inside that rules, for example, it's clear that the Portuguese government, in principle, wants, they don't want a free market, okay? They want to or have a centralized or a partial centralized tendering process. That for us has a lot of sense, okay, to minimize the risk. But it will depend on the speed that the government will need to have. I think that we commented before, okay, is that in Spain, for example, we are speaking about the 3-in-1, okay, that seabed lease, interconnection, okay, at the tariff, let's say, it will speed the process, okay, but you will have to assume a much higher risk, okay, with much higher definition, so the developers will not be able to make our work, okay, that is to optimize as much as we can and try to minimize the leverage cost of energy. I think that the two-step process is a much intelligent approach because it will allow the developers, okay, just to have the area predefined, spend money on that, okay, but there are other things inside, for example, okay, the reconsiderations of the work process, okay, the timelines, okay, that it will be between the CDF award and the FID decision, okay, so I think that we have to take in consideration all those points, okay, to be able to have a final answer. But I think that is achievable. I think that the risk is on the timelines that we will put and on the real ambitious targets that the government will have.
Just before jumping to Diederick, you touched in one, I think, very hot topic right now in Portugal, which is the licensing procedures and approach. There are many discussions. Government is open to hear many developers now. There are the two-phases approach, as you said, seabed right plus CFD. There are potentially one-shot approach, three-phases approach. From what you know, and you touched base as well on the Spain versus Portuguese reality. We know the port infrastructure in Spain, which exists already. Some of that we know the Spanish industry, which is a big portion of what Europe is doing now, is made in Spain. And we know also the Portuguese reality. We need to do many things ahead. Do you see that this auction approach would influence this development, or for other words, a developer with a seabed right only would be able to develop and engage with all the industry without having potentially a business plan closed, or on the other way around, the seabed right early will allow you to really push all this?
I mean, in my point, I think that if you have the rules of the game on the table, all the industry will develop. That's clear. The more that, on a two-step process, okay, the developer has time enough and the industry has time enough to develop everything, okay? So you are trying to minimize the risk. On a one-step process, the problem that you can have at the end is that you don't have the ports already constructed, or that there will be other factors, okay, that will make the developer will not take the final decision on that, okay? So I think that the longer that it takes the development phase, the better it is for the project. That's a reality.
Okay.
But it depends on the targets of the country, okay? It depends on the speed of the process. If you have a country that has clear targets, that has a clear legislation about what do you have to present, nobody is going to be delayed, there will be no problems with the stakeholder, you have a maritime spatial plan in place. I think that it can speed up the process so much, so you can go for a 3-in-1. But the reality is that those markets that we have seen that has been successful, like UK, Netherlands, they have gone for a more partially centralized or a centralized approach.
Thank you. Now coming to Diederick from ING Bank, from the financing point of view, taking into account what you just hear in this first round of questions, what would be the key conditions, or at least 2 or 3 key conditions that from a financing point of view, you would be able to release or to justify to your board back in Netherlands that there is a project there with certain billions and we need to invest on that? What are the criteria, the requirements that usually you do see as key to move all this?
Yeah, thank you. So I think we need to also understand the role of the banks. It's not ING, but the banks in this landscape. If I look at ourselves, we have financed roughly 25 gigawatts or involved in 25 gigawatts of offshore wind to date across, of course, the North Sea all the way to Taiwan. We are long-term holders of risk paper. We're not flipping paper by the time we commit. So we take a very long-term view on this business. We have seen also a really rocky ride in the early days of offshore wind, in the later days, so we haven't run away from offshore wind. It is a business which is inherently can be volatile, is cyclical, can be risky, so we're not running away from that at all. I think we are really looking of ways to get involved. That having said that, it is, of course, it's a challenging business in the sense of the word regulation have been mentioned I think on every panel, and that's of course key. For us, for a project to be bankable on a long-term basis, we of course look at the long-term revenue prospect, but increasingly we look at the short-term construction window and the stakeholders involved in that construction. And from a bank perspective, we may look at financing the project, but typically we're also providing bonding facilities, or supporting a sponsor at a corporate level. So a bank is involved in multiple ways, albeit not only directly involved in the project financing, which means that we look at, is this project viable from the diverse stakeholders in this asset? And is it, because we don't want to see that the issues that maybe a Siemens Gamesa is facing now, that's not good for us, not good for the industry, but not good from a bank perspective either. So we want to make sure that there is a decent level of sustainable profitability for all the key stakeholders in this business. And I think that's something that we spend a lot of time on. I think in the context of offshore wind, clearly it's inherently more risky. I think we have heard that. It's a bit novel. We have seen early stage, also here in Portugal, the development with the 3 floaters offshore. I've seen the charts and really impressed by how the technology actually was stable in a very, very tough environment. So that is super good. But clearly, if we do a project of scale of that nature, there will be a more conservative stance towards these projects. I think that's logical. So for me, the key condition is really a regulatory, really clear framework, long term. The second one is bankability, which essentially is about affordability. Can we, as society, afford the cost associated initially with floating offshore wind, which inherently will be more expensive, I think. And that's not only the financing cost, everything is about contingencies and buffers. So that is something we as a society will need to bear. And eventually it's all of us here bearing the brunt as taxpayers. So is that affordable in the context of alternatives? Alternatives can be a new interconnection with Spain or something. There are, of course, other ways to get your electricity network green rather than doing offshore wind, or floating offshore wind. So I think that's the balancing act. The other point which is really prominent in most of the banks nowadays is ESR and sustainability and biodiversity. So that is also for us, also by our regulator, the ECB, we get tons of questions about biodiversity and all these metrics. So that has to be, I think, embedded in almost the regulation on how you deal with that. because that is what I think we cannot have is that eventually bidders bid for a certain award and start to differentiating on biodiversity type topics, because that's, I think, is a non-starter eventually. So that is a key issue that I think also from a financing perspective is important.
Thank you, Derek. And by the way, best having you, you're Dutch, your bank is based in Dutch. It's Netherlands, a country that has been, as we learned this morning, developing structurally over the last 15 or 15 years, I would say, a great pipeline, knowing as well that Netherlands had before starting these greatest ports in Europe, greatest contractors, one of the greatest experience back on oil and gas. And you plan and you start and you make it. Now, looking all this experience and looking to Portugal and putting in all our reality, which is clear, no ports, no experience on this side, with floating on top of that. Do you see a smooth transition? This puts you a little bit nervous in terms of the coming future, or do you see this naturally coming up on our way here, having your experience back?
Yeah, I think clear as a bank, we do get involved in the development phase, but that's really compared to most of the stakeholders here in this room is next to nothing. So we take risk effectively from maybe FID or from financial close. So I think the way we see the world, we have as a bank massive commitments communicated to our investor base on what we commit every year on the renewable side. So we're not going to wait until a country is finally ready. We're just going to continue and deploy our balance sheet wherever countries or developers or projects are ready. And eventually that will also happen here. And if that's 2 years' time, then we'll be here in 2 years' time. It's 5 years' time, it's 5 years' time. So I think there's no, we have teams here on the ground. We're following all the floating offshore winds where we can, from South Korea all the way to here to France. And when these assets are ready to bank with the right parties, we will try to be there and compete for that business. And I think Portugal, indeed, as has been said, it's of course has a unique location. I didn't know there were so many ports, but there were in these two chairs already 4 ports represented. So I'm sure that there is a solution to be found here to allow the investment in a certain port to become leading for this floating offshore wind. But I think that focus is really important because that is also investment which we may be involved in, not me, but or maybe the EIB or whatever, public funding, but that has to happen, of course, in sequence.
Thank you.
Can I add?
Please, Marcel, please.
Another Dutch perspective. So I worked on some projects in Portugal, and which I classify as my best projects, right? So and that is with Portuguese contractors. So and if you look at the Netherlands, many laborers, construction laborers, are from Portugal, right? So inherently, a lot of capabilities are here. But we have also to recognize that if you do 0.5 gigawatt wind farm, we're talking about $1 billion plus project, which is probably an internationally led project, right? So you will have the framework together with the international knowledge and the local content that you might be able to develop. You will bring that together. And I think that will be done successfully, because essentially it's like how you set up the project and how you get the people to do the right work. And that can be done here or with the same people in the Netherlands, because the Dutch people will not do the welding or something like that, right? And you already build wind turbine masts here. So, I mean, you do big shipbuilding and ship maintenance work here. So it's a great question, but to ask a Dutch guy to say something about the Portuguese capability this is very difficult, but I can really talk about what I've experienced here. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Thank you. Marcus, speaking now in the ports, again, I think it's key. The infrastructures are the roads for our cars, which is at the end of the day are the floating offshore wind. So without infrastructure, I tend to say no floating offshore wind will be viable implemented here. Otherwise, we import from other countries. How do you see the role of the developer itself pushing all this port and potentially grid development and investments role? How do you see the role of the developer here?
I mean, for us, it's to press as much as we can, okay, signing MOUs. We are already assessing all the Portuguese ports, okay, having the depths, okay, assessing which should be the size that has to be increase of all of these ports. At the end, if there is no area secure, let's say, it will be difficult for us to just to invest on that once, okay? For us, it's clear that we'll have to speak with them, okay? Teach them also and working with them, yes, which will be the technology that we are going to use, because don't forget that the floating, as you have stated, okay, is in a really preliminary status. There are still 80, 19 different floater solutions, okay, and has not been decided. But also, all the developers are assessing turbines that are, right now, it doesn't exist. We are always speaking out 15, 20 megawatts turbines, okay? So we need to rationale all of that, okay, on the capacity that the ports will need for these kind of projects, okay, not for the current ones. So I think that we'll have to be working closely with them, okay, trying to understand which are the necessities that they will need. We as ACCIONA, you know that we have other brand, okay, that is ACCIONA Infrastructure, okay, that also is working different ports, okay, and they are bidding for this kind of extension of the port. So I think that if you are asking me if we'll put the money up front, yes, the answer will be no, okay, but I think that both of us, okay, will need to understand which are the necessities, because also the floating, okay, I think that the fixed bottom, okay, is more from a vessel point of view, okay, different types of ships, but for me, the floating solution, okay, the key issue is on the ports. How you build there, how you make the construction there, how you put on the site, okay, just to, when we'll be able to install them. So I think that is really a key issue, the ports for the floating.
Do you think, please, Michael?
I was just going to sort of add to that. I think going back to the question of government intervention, you know, for the ports to invest, yes, they can talk to you about the next upcoming projects, but for the amount of investment required, they really need a very long-term horizon about how future projects will roll out over 15, 20 years, because they're not going to invest just to build out 0.5 gigawatt and then throw the machinery away. They need a long-term plan, I think.
Mm-hmm. And this will lead us also to, I think, another challenge we do have, which is how to plan not only the investments in ports, and perhaps, Marcos, you do have the experience, I believe, in Galicia port, right, where ACCIONA is presenting as an industrial player. Looking to Galicia port, we have, I think, 6-8 years huge public investment or European investment level in order to be able now to have the private companies being implemented there and investing there. Do you think that the port management model, it's key also to push first the industry players and second to reduce a bit the exposure of a pure developer into the port infrastructure? How do you see these management models of the ports?
In my point of view, it will be important for Portugal, for the country. I mean, if you don't construct here, you will construct anywhere else, okay? I think that is important, as I commented before, that this has to be a country target, okay? It's just to modify the whole country, okay? Create an industry, okay? And as my colleagues has commented, okay, not only for Portugal, you have to think abroad, okay? And have in mind that all the investment that you will do, I think that later, even in the past roundtable, they have stated that each euro that you will invest, okay, it was like 5 euros, okay, in the Netherlands. The other guy has read that it will be 6 GB pounds, okay, on UK. So I think that it has sense, okay? It's a deal breaker, it's a bottleneck, you know. At the end, if you don't build here, you will bring, or you will do it outside. I think that for Portugal, for Spain, for each of the countries that has those kind of targets, it's important to invest on that, okay, and have the industry and have the necessary ports to build in here, okay, and to demonstrate that you are competitive with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Well, we have 20 minutes left. I will stop to answer. I will now open the possibility to all of you interact with our speakers. Is there any question on? seems you are still making load in your heads after lunchtime. No question? We have here.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the panelists. I have a question regarding the risk in offshore wind in Portugal. We know that Portugal is focused is expected to focus primarily on floating offshore wind. However, as we discussed in the previous sessions, there is a greater risk in these technologies because they are less mature than, for example, bottom fixed solutions. So I would like to ask if we could decrease the risk of implementing offshore wind in Portugal and, in consequence, the Portuguese supply chain by testing the implementation of smaller bottom fixed farms in Portugal before going fully into floating farms.
Thank you. It's anyone want to start?
Well,
Marcus?
I mean, in my point of view, I mean, I think that for me it has no so much sense, okay, because right now the bottom fix is already known, so everybody knows which will be the cost. I mean, if you will have the possibility, okay, because the reality here you have the meteoroceanic conditions, okay, and that the continental platform in Portugal is, I mean, it goes quickly down, okay, so I don't know if from an environmental point of view anybody will allow you to do that, but in that hypothetical case, I think that what are you going to get? Okay, only with 3 monopiles of jackets, I mean, you will not be able to create an industry. It's well developed right now. I don't see, okay, that to have 3 or 4 pilot projects, okay, of 50 megawatts, 3 turbines of bottom fix will make a difference. Here, what you have to have is a clear path, okay, of 10 gigawatts, 3.5, whatever, okay, but that will be floating. That's the technology that is really feasible in this country, and that's what I think that it has to bet the whole country for that, okay? In the same manner that UK did in the past of the Netherlands. I think that is 2 clear examples. I think that in the first panel they have stated, okay, that at the very beginning they were thinking about 200 euros per megawatt hour. So, I mean, that's the idea that they have, and it has been decreased and reduced, and they have created a whole industry over there. I think that any country like Portugal, for example, is able to do that, okay, reduce the cost. And personally in ACCIONA, we are bidding, not for the bottom fix, okay? We know that we are a little bit late on the bottom fix. That's the reason why we are focusing on the floating path and technology, and we really believe that it's going to be much cheaper than the bottom fix in the future, okay? Have in mind also that, I mean, in Bloomberg, for example, the other day I read that we have 62 gigawatts right now installed, okay, and in 2030 or 2035 they were planning to have 450 gigawatts installed, and I mean, more than 50% of that figure, it will be floating. So there will be a huge opportunity in this market, and I think that Portugal or even Spain, okay, where I'm from, cannot lose that.
Any one of you want to also have some comments on that?
If I
Please.
Anyway, yes. So I was just thinking, I would be happy to do 0.5 gigawatt of wind farm onshore, right? The only question is where, right? So the choice to go offshore and then to go further offshore, because the first bit is shallow enough for fixed bottom, but then if you go a bit further, you cannot do fixed bottom anymore. And I think in the Netherlands, where that is my limited bit of experience, if you walk on the beach and you see the windmills, right, then you think like, well, I'm a modern guy, so I don't think they're ugly. But there's many people that think these things are ugly. Now imagine that you'd have to do this in the first, whatever, kilometer or so of the beach, right? That will be funny, right? If we do this in the first kilometer of the beach, because it's 250 meters high, right? That's what we're thinking of. So there is limitations of what you can do. So technologically, it's not required. Economically, it's known what it will do. So it's just a matter of what will the country make available, right? So and I think onshore is limited. I think many people are happy to do it, even Madoqua, right? And then you get to floating, if you want to do that in Portugal, right? So that's I think why you don't see fixed bottom solutions really being discussed.
Michael, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think, you know, I do my Dr. Death bit when I'm standing up there talking about all the risks, but I think we can be very confident that floating offshore wind will work. The platforms, particularly the sort of semi-sub and principal power type platforms, are stable and proven. There are question marks about long-term wear and tear, but that will come out over time and how best to manage them. So I think the lessons from I don't think a fixed offshore wind project would really de-risk floating offshore wind for Portugal. I think it will stand up in its own right in the timescales we're talking about. It will be more about trying to understand your assets and capabilities for those operation and maintenance events, when it breaks, how do you fix it quickly kind of scenarios. So if you can get to that stage, that's the de-risking that's required, but that's fairly specific really to the floating offshore wind scenario, I think.
Thank you, Michael. Any question? From Antonio over there.
Thanks a lot, Antonio Vidigal. My question is for my friend João Conceição, and it is the following. As you well mentioned, interconnection points are scarce. But in fact, REN owns a 200 megawatt cable at Viana do Castelo. I think there are work to do to operate it at 150 and connect it to the 380 kV network. But wouldn't it make sense to de-risk floating offshore to give priority to build, say, 200 megawatts there? I know it is a pilot zone, but you could use it as a pilot zone, for instance, to develop a floating substation of which there is not much experience. Wouldn't that be a good priority to have? Because we compete in time. We already saw that these two-phase processes take a huge amount of time. For me, it would be the way to have results early. And I believe that the biggest offshore park available today is an 88 megawatt in Norway. If you put there 200, you are doubling, and then you double 200 for 500, 1,000, 10 gigas. I think, as we say in Portugal, we eat an elephant by slices. For me, the next slice is 200 megawatts at Vienna, where much of the work has already been done by you.
Right. Well, that's a good question, and I don't want to run away from it. But REN is not the right entity to answer you that, because we are not the policy makers, we are the policy implementers. So we follow what are the guidelines that the policy makers and regulators give to us. It's true technically what you are saying. We have a pilot which is connected to the onshore. We did, and I'm very proud of REN's team, because we did that on time and on budget. It was a challenge. Everyone was putting pressure on REN at that time because we would not make it. We did make it. We did make it in advance before the generators that were put it there. We found a solution which, as you know, it's a temporary solution, because in order to shorten time, we needed to work with the distributor operator so that the connection onshore was not done to the backbone, but was done temporarily to the distributed operator, because the capacity that was being requested at that time, that solution would work. Of course, if we want to upscale, we need to find a much more robust solution and connect the coast of Vienna to the near backbone substation on the transmission grid. And I can tell you that that's also a challenge, because it's not easy to do overhead lines on that area. And each time we say that we go underground, everyone in this country complains because the cost is going to be too high. Answering to you, technically, yes, it could be an approach. Of course, this infrastructure that is there, it's definitely not sufficient for these targets that we are speaking about. it will not encompass 2 gigawatts of capacity, but to a start, yes. Having said that, I share what was said. Then you would have to have also the public acceptance of the local stakeholders there, which, as you know, they are quite, they understand the benefits, and that's fair to say. Everyone understands the benefits of renewables, but we always face this issue of not in my backyard. And this type of, the people that lives there, namely the fishermen, they say, well, it's nice, but put this much far away from the coast because you are destroying our activity. So to conclude, we implement what we are asked to implement. We do it on time, and to conclude, I share what has been said here. This is quite a big endeavor that we have in front of us. The first major pillar that needs to be there, it's a stable framework and a clearly a high-end vision that is more or less a consensus between everyone, so that the different parts of the value chain come into the field and to implement this. Otherwise, it's not going to be achievable.
Thank you. Any questions? Here from Antonio.
Antonio Sarmiento. My question is the following. It has been said over this morning that the prices of offshore wind are extremely high. My question is, do you believe that we reach the top, or that we will face further higher costs? And at the same time, how long do you think we need to wait to have costs more similar to what we was used to face?
Perhaps, well, who wants to start?
I
Michael?
tell a little
Marcel?
story, as I do. Right? So I was filling up my electrical car on the highway, and the cost was roughly €1 per kilowatt hour. Right? That felt not right, because I'm used to such a low power cost. And say the cost of offshore wind is in the range of €1 per kilowatt hour, right? The €100 per megawatt hour. Sorry. That would be 10 cents.
Yes.
So 10 cents to €1, right? But I was paying €1 at the highway. And of course, that was all profit to some companies that were managing the systems, and a little bit of low cost, I would say. But I think the cost of power will go up. The price of power will go up for exactly the same reasons as I said. The 10 gigawatts today is the low value for the coming years to come, and it will double or triple, right? So the demand for power will grow. That's not a happy message for people that see their electricity bill, so I encourage you to take your own solar panels at home. But that, I think, is a reality, because we want to get rid of fossil fuels. And as soon as we do that, we need to replace it. With what? With something that is created with power. Because what else is there? Right? And I'm not sure how you see that, but if we go to triple the power in Portugal, then the price will go up, right?
It's a matter of supply and demand. We all understand that mechanism when we go to supermarkets, but when we have to pay the electricity bills, we tend to have the reaction and to say that the electricity is quite expensive. It's true what you are saying. Having said that, I think that it's a never-ending story of the question: are we all willing to pay the costs of this getting rid of fossil fuels? Because I think that we all want to get rid of fossil fuels, until the moment we see the bill, because when we see the bill, questions arise. and we have the discussion, like Professor Antonio Sarmento is asking, when is this going to be on parity with other technologies? Renewables are at a different stage of development, theoretically more expensive than technology that are mature. And we are speaking about a technology that, as it was repeatedly said, it's not completely mature. So theoretically, it's more expensive. If we believe that we are going to have all these electricity needs, I totally share your view, and we will need sooner or later to go offshore, because onshore the territory is not capable of absorbing more generation sites for renewables, being solar, wind, hydro, biomass, or whatever. So this is something that people need to be conscious and need to participate in this discussion, so that it is to have a much a higher consensus as possible. Otherwise, we will be each time discussing if the move was too early or not. We are discussing that in Portugal since the last 10, 20 years. Until a couple of years ago, renewables were very expensive. During the pandemic period, renewables generated superávit of 2 billion euros per year. They almost pay the tariff deficit. So this is the rules of the game.
Diederick, please.
I think indeed I recognize, of course, that the power consumption and the demand for power will go up. I mean, that's, I think, very obvious. I think the question is that in the end of the day also having an upward lift on the power price. I think the system cost will go up because we have to invest. I mean, that is the networks or anything which in between generation and the networks. But the question is if that power cost will go up, because I think what we also see, and I'm personally sometimes concerned, if I see the build out of, for instance, solar in Spain, I'm sure at times of the day in the summer, or maybe close to the summer, the price will be zero or negative. So I think it's really a matter of when you take that power or when you need that power. And of course, base load is different, but if you charge your car and you do it more in a demand side response system, you can do that actually cheaper potentially at times. So that is, I think, one part of the equation. And the other one is, do we need to invest in floating offshore in order to meet the goal of a country? That I find the way I think the EU system is a bit set up, that every country has to meet certain obligations. Is that EU-wide the optimal solution? Or can we go to Morocco, invest massive solar and wind in Morocco, and export it to Iberia instead of the UK, what X-Link is doing? And so there, I wonder whether we're smart in actually doing this, and a bit less silo focus could also help, I think, in at least managing the overall cost for the system.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael?
I don't disagree with any of that, but I would challenge the fact, I think fixed offshore wind at least is still very cheap compared to particularly, say, new nuclear or something, where in the UK we can compare the two in the contracts for difference, and they have a higher price and for 35 years instead of 15 years, and it's index linked, and that doesn't cover any decommissioning costs for nuclear power plants. So fixed offshore wind is very cheap. Floating offshore wind will come down in price. How much? Probably not as low as fixed offshore wind, but we don't know really. So, but of particular note, and Diederick, your friends at Green Giraffe recently did a bit of analysis, and I don't know, we might challenge it, but they reckon that for the recent increase in the levelized cost of energy, about a quarter of it was due to the inflationary effect on components, supply chain, and contractors, and the other 3/4 was due to the fact that interest rates have shot up, and that's how important the when you have a highly leveraged project, the impact of the general interest rate environment can be. So much of that recent rise is specifically down to the economic environment more generally, which hopefully may reverse at some stage. But
And I think it's important, I'm the bank here, so it's not the margin that increased by 3 times. I mean, just make sure that people...
Indeed, and I tend to say also that that really depends on the country strategy. I do recall many years ago that we do have, I believe, a success strategy in Portugal called Deurhof, Eólicas de Portugal, which was as a target, and then export also all the know-how acquired. So if we put in all the equation, then the exportations that potentially, as we discussed already here, that the floating offshore wind can have a role in Portugal, this also should be placed in the equation. And I also tend to say that we do need quickly a carbon market organized, because if so, this can shift also some of these business plans. Well, we are running against time. Any other questions? Over there, please.
Is it on? Yeah. I just wanted to quickly respond to the discussion on price and cost of energy, where I think we have to be very careful to position renewables as more expensive. I think it's going to be a temporary situation, maybe, and if we scale up enough, fast enough, I don't think it will be a real issue. And I also think we have to be very aware of the actual cost of what we're doing now, the hidden cost of very polluting, damaging fuels and feedstocks we're using, the cost of floodings, the cost of food shortages, the cost of droughts, maybe even the cause of wars sometimes, oil and gas, they are sometimes in certain regions. So I think those hidden costs, if we put them on our electricity bill today, we would have a system where we would start to appreciate the very good price of renewables.
Thank you. I think this is indeed a very important point, how much we do value for our energy security, indeed. And also on a European perspective, we do need to run on the energy independence, for sure, but we do also need to run on the supply chain independence as well. Then if we cover our heads, we leave our feet open. So we need to work in these two sizes. Any other question? We have only one more for a very quick answer to the panelists. One, okay, please.
Hi, my name is Soraya. I used to work for WavEC, and I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm currently working for the Netherlands. I sell for one of the biggest IT companies. And 3 weeks ago, we had a session with DLL. So I don't know, maybe ING knows DLL. And it's how we have to sell something that is premium in IT and sell capital, so make them take a loan. And it was very hard for us because you have much cheaper tech and you don't have to take a loan, or you take the Lexus and you take the loan. And we were trained that we have, as you said, we have to show the environmental benefits, all the other benefits, and because it's a long-term investment. So I think we have to start thinking like that as well, not only on the short term, but on the long term. So that's my experience from a sales perspective.
Thank you. Well, we have the red screen in front of us. Unfortunately, I had many questions to do, for sure, in the audience, but we need to stop and to close this section. I would like to thank again all the speakers here and wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.
We have a short break until 4 o'clock, and then we come back. Thank you.